My sister-in-law excluded me from the family vacation I paid for, yet she still expected me to cover her lavish bill, but my cold move shattered her illusions. I paid for my wife's family vacation, but my sister-in-law excluded me at checkout. When she expected me to cover her bill, I made her pay. I never imagined feeling this depressed while lounging in an upscale Miami Beach resort. A family vacation that was supposed to be unforgettable has become a nightmare because of my sister-in-law, Ella, 38 years old. I was accompanied by my wife, Rye, 42 years old, her aging parents, 76 years old and 70 years old, and Ella. We have been married for 10 amazing years. I'm already at my wit's end because of Ella's treatment of me just 2 days into this vacation. Over the past 10 years, Rye and I have established a pleasant life together. We have both put in a lot of effort to get to the senior positions we currently hold at our respective firms. Our success is reflected in our lifestyle. To break up the routine of our hectic lives, we take at least 3 large vacations a year in addition to several weekend excursions. Since we decided not to have children, we are able to travel widely. We've made it a point to take Rye's parents along on one of our yearly vacations for the past 2 years. Her mother finds it difficult to travel with her father alone, as his health has been progressively deteriorating. This summer's trip was particularly meaningful because Rye's father had mentioned that he had always wanted to go to Miami, where he and his wife had gone on their honeymoon almost 50 years prior. He spoke of it with a certain fervor that betrayed a dread that this would be his final opportunity to relive those treasured recollections. Given how expensive a week in Miami would be, I promptly turned down his offer to help with the costs. I wanted to do this for these individuals since they have been treating me like their own child for the past 10 years. I can easily afford such costs because of my financial circumstances, and it was well worth the money to witness their happiness. Upon returning to Miami, when Ella asked to go with us, our journey took a very different turn. Ella has always been in a hard spot financially, unlike Rye and me. Her husband's salary hardly meets the necessities for her 3 school-age children. She would always remark that she hadn't been able to afford a real vacation since her honeymoon whenever we shared pictures from our trips. She came up to us directly this year about going to Miami. I consented, even though I knew I would be responsible for all of her costs. Family should support family, after all. Ella's behavior seemed strange from the moment we arrived in Miami. Only a few hours after arriving at our beach resort, the first warning sign arrived. Ella recommended that the family take a picture in front of the breathtaking ocean scenery. To get everyone in the photo, I grabbed my phone and prepared to set the timer. She stopped me at that point. "Oh, would you just snap the photo for us? Mom, Dad, Rye, and I are the only 4 people we desire," she said. Her remarks were like a kick to the face. I said nothing, figuring they might have preferred a single picture of their original family. However, this was not an isolated incident. Ella made it the central topic of our trip. She would find a way to keep me out of every restaurant, tourist attraction, and special occasion. She kept saying, "Oh, just the 4 of us," or, "This one's just for family." I took over as the official photographer, spending all of my time behind the lens rather than creating memories with my wife and in-laws. Even worse, Ella began sharing these pictures on social media, fabricating a story about this family vacation in which I didn't exist. My in-laws would encourage me to participate in the pictures, and Rye would occasionally step in and stress that I was also family, but Ella always managed to sway the situation until I was back in front of the camera for their ideal family reunion. I seemed to be nothing more than a walking ATM and personal photographer. I was looking forward to unwinding in the immaculate pool with its stunning ocean view after a long day of trekking and touring. I was about to enter the water when Ella hit me once again. "Will you be able to stay out a while? We want a picture of a girl that only includes Mom, Rye, and me," she said. What began as a seemingly simple request ended up involving me standing by the pool for an hour while Ella staged an ongoing photo session. The women appeared first, followed by a picture of siblings, and then another original family picture. Every time I attempted to join them, she would come up with a new combination that conveniently left me out. If my presence was such a hassle, I couldn't help but wonder why she had bothered to come on this vacation. The following day's boat ride incident was far more obvious. When we got to the tourist destination, they provided calm boat rides along the shore. Families with 4 people would love the boats, with 2 rows of 2 seats apiece. However, we were 5. Ella stepped right in with her idea before anybody else could offer a reasonable rotation scheme. She insisted that this arrangement would be perfect for family photos and made arrangements for Rye's parents to sit together in one row while she took the seat next to Rye in the second. In the subsequent boat, I found myself surrounded by strangers. They also purchased a memento of their boat ride with the family. This is the text punctuated and clearly divided into paragraphs. Currently, Ella's social media feed features the picture. My entire holiday experience was well captured in the souvenir photo from the boat excursion, where I was awkwardly crammed between strangers as my wife and her family had wonderful memories without me. I couldn't help but observe that I was always the one who had to be left out of any situation, even though I was paying for this entire vacation. Ella never once volunteered to trade places or take turns being the odd one out. It was the same for dinner at the fancy seafood restaurant. I had been looking forward to this reservation for weeks, particularly asking for a prime table with an unhindered view of the sunset at one of Miami's most upscale waterfront restaurants. The hostess escorted us to a circular table for 6 when we got there, which was well situated to capture the golden hour light across the ocean. Rye's parents were seated across from us, and I had imagined us sitting together and taking in the scenery while we shared this beautiful time. Since Ella was a last-minute addition to our trip, she might have easily grabbed a seat on the side. Instead, Ella sat beside Rye before anyone could even bring out a chair, and her parents, of course, took the best seats. With my back to the sunset I had deliberately planned this dinner around. I was forced into the worst conceivable position between Rye's parents and the crowded server station. Ella's true colors came out when Rye attempted to defend me by proposing that we reorganize the seating. "Stop being so clingy," she yelled at her sister, reminding everyone that this was a family holiday. As the evening wore on, the dinner only grew worse. I made an effort to engage in the discussion in the hopes of discovering some points of agreement, but Ella had other ideas. She would purposefully direct the conversation away from me and toward things like high school escapades, family inside jokes, and childhood recollections. Whenever I tried to participate, Ella would constantly interrupt and reroute the conversation. Even when Rye and her parents attempted to incorporate me by providing background or making connections between stories and current affairs, I felt like an outsider peering in at my own dinner table because of the unbreakable wall of shared history she built. I had stopped attempting to join in by the time dessert came. It was during our scheduled spa day that the last insult occurred. I had carefully set up private suites in the resort's opulent spa, one for Ella alone, one for her parents, and one for Rye and myself. I believed that the 4 of us could still enjoy the spa treatments together until my father-in-law opted to stay back at the beach because he wasn't feeling well. Ella, however, saw another chance to keep me out. She smiled and said they needed a girls' day at the spa, so I should keep her father company instead. She was once again forcing me to cancel an event I had organized and paid for, and she was using my father-in-law's illness as leverage to make me appear self-centered if I objected. The manipulation was clear. Despite not going as planned, the day ended up being better than I had anticipated. My father-in-law and I had one of our most sincere talks ever while we were sitting on the beach. We connected on a level we had never experienced before as he told stories about his life and gave insights from his years of expertise. I wanted to vent my aggravation that had been building up over the trip by telling him how his younger daughter was treating me. However, I couldn't bring myself to burden him with family trouble when I watched him relish the ocean wind and share his recollections with such contentment. One night in our hotel room, I attempted to have a private conversation with Rye about this. She admitted that I felt upset, but her remark only made me more perplexed. She explained how their father's frequent military deployments had affected their childhood and implied that Ella's actions might not have been deliberate. Ella may be frantically attempting to relive those lost family times as their father's health deteriorates. They seldom ever took formal family holidays together. I started to doubt myself after hearing Rye's explanation. Did I come across as too sensitive? I was paying for the vacation, so was it improper of me to expect to be included? I realized how much Ella's actions had damaged my confidence since I was even doubting my right to be wounded. The influx of encouraging comments I received after posting about my difficulties online confirmed what I'd been feeling all along. People remarked that Ella's exclusionary behavior was too regular to be coincidental and that her behaviors demonstrated deliberate intent rather than careless oversight. Their viewpoints made it clearer to me that this was about fundamental respect and acknowledgement as a family member, not about having the right to be included just because I paid. My wife attempted to use their early experiences to justify her sister's actions, but the truth was more straightforward. Whatever Ella's reason, what she was doing wasn't acceptable. The persistent isolation and disrespect had gotten out of hand by the last few days of our journey to Miami. My breaking point was finally reached the morning before we left. In our hotel room, I sought some alone time with Rye and confronted her about her passive attitude during the trip. Her response remained centered on maintaining harmony. Although she admitted to observing Ella's actions, she maintained that confronting her would just cause drama and ruin what might be one of their father's final family vacations. Although what she said made sense, it seemed like yet another betrayal. Once more, family unity was being sacrificed at the expense of my sentiments. Something changed inside of me at that very instant. I nodded in agreement with Rye's request to move on, but my mind was already working out a strategy. Ella had joyfully savored the opulent lodging and facilities I was offering her, and she had spent the entire vacation treating me like an unwanted stranger. She seems to have forgotten that I was paying for every meal, activity, and spa treatment she had received during this entire trip. Maybe it was time to let her know exactly what it meant to pretend that I wasn't a member of the family. I started my strategy on the last morning we were in Miami. Claiming that Ella and I would follow, I casually advised Rye to take her parents to the airport before us. Rye quickly saw through my motives. "I understand what you're attempting to accomplish," she muttered. Her little nod was all the acknowledgement I needed. "Sure, I said, "and now you can remain neutral as you have been for the whole trip." Rye appeared prepared to let karma run its course after observing her sister routinely keep me out of every family gathering for a week. When they were gone, I brought my well-thought-out plan to the front desk. The hotel's billing method was advantageous to me. All extra fees accrued during the stay were paid at checkout, even though the room rates had been paid in advance. Assuming I would pay for everything, this included every room service order, spa treatment, and poolside cocktail Ella had freely consumed. In an attempt to justify it for tax purposes, I asked the management to divide the bills by suite. The request was so routine that the manager didn't even bat an eye. I couldn't help but think about how Ella had never considered the financial or emotional consequences of her actions as I stood there watching him come to terms with the separation that was about to change. I paid for my own accommodation and my in-laws' suite and then waited for the big reveal. Rye's father's mobility challenges and wheelchair arrangements required additional time, so she and her parents were already en route to the airport. Ella and I were alone in the hotel lobby after that. Ella's face was devoid of color as she gazed at the itemized bill in her hands when the manager summoned her down to settle her account. The sum was astounding, likely many months' worth of her typical spending. As reality struck, her uncertainty turned to panic as her gaze shifted between the bill and my face. "You're not covering mine, then?" she asked. I remained calm. "I've already paid for my family. You can cover for yourself," I replied. Ella struggled with her credit card and gave it to the manager, her hand trembling a little. My suspicions were only verified by the declined transaction notification. She had been living far beyond her means for the entire week, confident that I would pay for it. Her credit limit was not even close to covering half of her debt, even when the manager swiped her card once again. She was now feeling the effects of all those girls-only spa days and fancy dinners, and this time, her assigned ATM wasn't saving her. It was pure theater for the next half hour in the hotel lobby. Ella paced back and forth, attempting to come up with a plan for dealing with this sudden issue. She would look at me frantically every few minutes, obviously hoping that I would give in and offer to pay, but I remained seated on the comfortable couch in the lobby, appearing composed while relishing every moment of her situation. I knew that if she had just apologized for her actions during the journey, I could have ended her agony with a swipe of my card. However, Ella's pride prevented her from doing so. Rather, as though she still had the right to my money after a week of treating me like an unwanted invader, she wanted me to offer to help. She finally took the call she had been putting off. As she described the circumstances, I could hear her husband's anger rising over the phone. He was demanding to know how she could spend so carelessly, as the bill she had accrued was almost equal to his entire monthly salary. The money was finally transmitted to pay the account after what seemed like an eternity of difficult conversations and perhaps some desperate promises on her part. Ella sat quietly in the taxi on the way to the airport, perhaps still analyzing her husband's reaction. Upon her return home, her problems were far from done, but she was unaware of this. She found out I hadn't finished her flight check-in when we got to the airport, which was already getting close to departure time. She was left standing in the ordinary line, fumbling with her bags and getting more and more agitated as she watched the minutes pass, while I breezed through priority check-in. When I had discreetly booked business class upgrades for Rye, her parents, and myself at the gate, a pleasant surprise to round off their trip comfortably, that was the last straw. Ella, stuck with her original budget seat, saw the full tale conveyed by the expression on her face as she walked past our roomy business class seats. She remained silent, but her stiff posture and clenched jaw said a lot. We had first-class service up front, but she sat in economy the whole time. At last, Ella's calmness broke the instant we touched down. Tears were streaming down her face as she started into her account of events, virtually running to her parents at baggage claim. Her dramatic account claimed that I had purposefully denied her the flight upgrades, humiliated her in public, and left her at the hotel. Conveniently, she omitted the part about her week-long effort to keep me out of every family activity. As she went on with her performance, her father, who was already exhausted from the trip, became clearly upset. She was too preoccupied with portraying herself as the victim of my alleged mistreatment to care about his health, even at this precise moment. Throughout Ella's performance, I remained composed and waited for the appropriate opportunity to argue my position. When I did talk, I described how she had deliberately kept me out of every family activity while on a trip that I had paid for. One by one, I exposed every family-only picture, every staged seating arrangement, and every purposefully private conversation. The reasoning was straightforward. Why should she ask me to pay for her costs as family if she didn't think of me as family enough to be included in the memories? When her mother stepped in, Ella's performance abruptly stopped. Rye's mother had had enough of her daughter's antics after a week. "Ella, enough," she said firmly. "We don't want to get involved. We noticed you cornering him the whole time. We urged you to include him, but you had your own plans to sideline him. Now deal with it." Ella reacted even more brutally, refusing to take responsibility. When she accused me of controlling the family with money, her true colors came out. "You partnered with your husband to humiliate your sister, your own blood," she yelled, turning to face Rye. "You'll see what this man is going to do to you. He's going to sleep with another woman right under your nose, and you won't be able to do anything. You're blinded by his money." Rye responded angrily to the unfounded accusation, making the baggage claim area seem like a scene from a family drama. Without Rye's father, the situation might have been worse. He had sat in respectful silence the entire journey, watching everything but saying little. His straightforward remark, "Ella, your brother-in-law has done enough for you. If you can't appreciate it, better keep your mouth shut," put an end to Ella's outburst, but the harm to family ties had already been done. There was a profound stillness in the airport terminal following my father-in-law's last remarks. With quiet firmness, he asked to depart right away, and I hurriedly assisted him to the car. Ella stood there by herself as we drove off. Even though she was 70 miles from home, she was too proud to beg for a ride. I knew the taxi fee would be exorbitant because she had arrived with us and hadn't brought her own car to the airport. However, after a week of her purposeful seclusion, I lost the will to care. It was a quiet journey to my in-laws' house. They both sincerely thanked us for the vacation when we got there. The extended embrace from my father-in-law conveyed more than words could possibly express. Everything was validated by that hug. After we got home, Rye and I resumed our regular routines and, at first, avoided talking about what had transpired. A few days later, Rye finally broke the silence. The subject remained unexplored. She disclosed that Ella was dealing with severe financial repercussions. Her husband was seeking full reimbursement since he was upset over having to save her. Ella found it difficult to handle the payback as well as her usual credit card obligations when he declined to save her pompous butt, as he described it. Rye was in favor of what I was doing but subtly hinted that I could have gone too far. However, she admitted that her sister had required this wake-up call. For years, Ella had treated people with disdain and exploited their charity. It felt like long overdue justice that she was now being held accountable for her acts. I was able to honestly respond that I didn't regret my choices when Rye asked. Ella had selected her own tuition by her actions, and often, the most expensive lessons are also the most successful. I got a range of responses after posting my tale online. Some said that I was too severe and that I ought to have just paid the price to maintain harmony in order to finance everyone's lavish vacation. They wanted me to be a doormat and silently accept being treated like an outsider. However, I refused to be used that way since I'm aware of my value. I only wanted Ella to treat me with basic respect and include me in family events. I never intended for her to grovel or become my servant. Her pride was more important to her than making amends. Yet, even after everything, I would have paid for her expenditures if she had just admitted her mistake and apologized. In actuality, Ella and I never had a close relationship. When she would visit Rye, our interaction was limited to courteous greetings at family events over the years. We didn't have any meaningful conversations or a true connection. Nevertheless, because she was family, I readily agreed to pay for her trip when she requested to go on the vacation. That kindness ought to have at least gained her some fundamental respect, but instead, it seemed to strengthen her resolve to keep me out of her life. Ella's husband was still furious that he had to spend all of his money to pay for her exorbitant expenses. She had accrued a bill that was almost equivalent to his monthly wage. If their spouse spent a week acting like a princess on someone else's alleged dime, no working individual would be pleased to see their hard-earned money go. However, rather than take ownership of her actions, Ella did what she does best, which is to fabricate a story in which I am the villain who purposefully humiliated her, and she is the victim. Knowing that Thanksgiving might be one of the final holidays spent with my father-in-law due to his deteriorating health, my mother-in-law had been organizing an extra special celebration. During the planning stages, however, Ella's husband's refusal to attend threw a wrench in the preparations. He couldn't tolerate being seated at the same table as someone who would make fun of someone who wasn't as wealthy. My mother-in-law finally had enough at that point. She sat him down and told him everything about Ella's actions on the trip to Miami. She said to him, "Check out the pictures from the vacation. Really look at them. Ella's own social media posts had photo after photo of me being purposefully left out, shoved behind the camera, or forced to sit apart. It was impossible to ignore the visible evidence of my systematic exclusion. My mother-in-law described how she and my father-in-law had made several attempts to involve me, but Ella had always found new methods to keep me out of the picture. I had always respected Ella's husband, so this was very painful. Although we weren't close friends, we always had cordial and courteous interactions on Thanksgiving and other holidays. I had never denigrated him because of his financial circumstances. I had never even entertained such ideas. We were only two men who had joined the same family and were doing our best to provide for our wives and help out where we could. Ella would go to great lengths to avoid accepting responsibility for her actions, as seen by the way she had tricked him into viewing me as a classist villain. After everything that had transpired, I was hesitant to attend Thanksgiving dinner but went out of respect for my father-in-law. A convenient explanation of visiting his parents was used to justify Ella and her husband's absence. The true story, which was far more repulsive than I had anticipated, didn't surface until after my father-in-law had gone to bed. It seemed that a significant argument in Ella's marriage had been sparked by the Miami incident. Instead of gaining humility from the event, she had used her shame as fuel to continuously disparage her husband based on his income. Even though she only worked 20 hours a week as a part-time employee, she started pressing him to take on a second job on top of his full-time job. He accepted the reasonable requirement that he take a break from childcare and domestic chores in exchange for looking for more work. This concession infuriated Ella. Ella's husband had sobbed while telling her everything, according to my mother-in-law. It was astounding how much was expected of him while she had a relaxed schedule. Ella wanted him to work well over 40 hours a week and still handle his fair share of household duties. It seems that the entitled attitude that had been so noticeable during our trip to Miami was only the beginning. After spending a week accruing debt she was unable to pay, the woman was now criticizing her diligent husband for not giving her a more opulent lifestyle. Ella's mother-in-law had done everything she could to help her see the light. She tried to convince Ella that her demands were unrealistic, supported her son-in-law, and gave advice to her daughter. However, it appeared that Ella had become dangerously aroused by the taste of luxury during our journey to Miami. Once claiming to be happy with modest family holidays, the woman was suddenly consumed with leading a life she hadn't earned. The situation got so bad that my mother-in-law had to give a firm order at last. She bluntly advised Ella that she shouldn't count on the family's support if her actions resulted in a divorce. More significantly, she was cautioned not to discuss marital issues with her father because the stress of seeing his daughter's marriage fall apart due to her newfound materialism was too much for his health. Rye and I thought about how our well-meaning invitation had gone awry on the way home from Thanksgiving dinner. There's no turning back once you taste the luxury of a private island. I recalled a remark I'd seen on display at the resort: once you experience the luxury of a private island, you'd never set foot on a public one. This also applied to someone who had entered business class after years of economy. Her spouse was now suffering because we had unintentionally allowed Ella to see a way of life she couldn't support. I felt bad about the whole thing, not because I forced her to pay her own expenses, but because I exposed her to a lifestyle that had so thoroughly distorted her viewpoint. She momentarily had luxury, but now her husband, a kind man who worked hard to support his family, was being punished for not being able to sustain it. All I could do was hope she would change her mind before ruining her marriage to live a lifestyle she couldn't afford.